What's up, all Hogs Media listeners? It is Wednesday, August 14th, and I am back, and Josh was back, and we are finally ready to bring you another great episode. And today's episode is running backs and top five in Razorback history. And we're just gonna go off that and debate the top five. This is, just as close as quarterbacks, which is what we did about a month ago. So it'll
Yeah,
be cool to take a look at.
it'll be fun. We're gearing up. Obviously, football season is right around the corner. Um,
Weeks, I think 15 days.
yeah, that's right. And so yeah, we're just kind of having fun until then, until we have the chance to actually, talk about the team that you
Recap
see on the
games
field,
and have
recap games,
something to
that.
watch. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, we're just having fun. Um, Running backs. I love talking about old skill positions. It's just fun. Reminiscing is always a good time. So let's talk about what we look at when our criteria for what makes a great running back. Obviously yards in a season, career yards, both of those. That is probably the most important stat, right? Because a player can't always control touchdowns if the team isn't able to, you know, get in scoring zone, or if the coach calls passing plays. But rushing yards is a obviously a big metric for how much contribution they're giving. Yards per carry
Yeah.
is obviously good, but you still need to be above a certain threshold. If you only run the ball 4 times all season and average 25 yards a carry, that
Yeah.
doesn't really mean anything as much as a guy who's carrying it. I would say kind of a standard that we're looking at is, you want to have a guy who's carrying the ball at least into the 100, like 110, 120 times per season. And that's kind of like low end. If you're doing that, that means you're getting 8, 9, maybe 10 carries a game, which is a good enough contribution to at least be in the conversation. Um, you know, and then yeah, some of these guys have as many as 300 carries in a season. So we're looking at that. Obviously, like I said a second ago, touchdowns does end up becoming a factor as you get more into the nitty gritty. Um, and yeah, those are the main factors. We're not really looking as much at like their receiving stats added on top of it. A
Not
couple of
really.
them might get that as a like little shoe in, but looking more as like a true running back. And then finally the eye test. Obviously, breaking tackles doesn't really show up on the stat sheet
Yeah.
sometimes, but sometimes it does, but that didn't really come around until later. The ability to juke a guy, the ability to find the right hole at the right time. It's like you have one runner who maybe is consistently averaging 3 yards a carry or 4, but he could have been averaging 7 or 8 if he would have made better choices when he ran. And that stuff doesn't show up on a stat sheet. And so some of this is, what we call the eye test. And then I'd say like speed, and toughness kind of comes into the eye test, right? Because those don't show up on the stat sheet. You could maybe look up what guys weightlifting and 40-yard dash stats are, but that's not, you know, as much of the concern as how that plays out on the field. Do they look fast? Do they look tough? Are they bouncing up after hard hits and getting after it again and taking on tacklers head on? So yeah, so why don't we dig in and Garen, go ahead and give us who's your number 5 on, the top 5 list.
So this was a pretty difficult pick. I've looked up all that criteria, and I decided to go with someone I got a pretty big eye test of, and that was Jonathan Williams. So I put him at number five.
Jonathan Williams, starting running back, 2014.
Mhm.
Uh, he was on the team. How many years total was he
I
rushing
believe
for?
I believe three. He was on the team.
Okay.
I think he left.
Uh, yeah, he was in there around the same time as Alex Collins. His best season was 2014, 211 carries. 1,190 yards, 12 touchdowns. So why are you putting Jonathan Williams? I think that's a little bit of a interesting hot take. So tell me why you have him in the top five.
Like I said, I grew up watching him, so the eye test was there. I get to see how good of a running back he was. And I mean, you just read off those stats, and he's 11th in career rushing yards, and he did share a backfield with Alex Collins, so there is that element. So I think if he had a backfield to himself, it's a different story. But I feel like he was a pretty impactful running back, and I know some of these guys that are on the list might have better stats, but I feel like Jonathan had more of an impact on our teams when he was here. I feel like that era of football from 2012 to 2015 was very run heavy, and I think that was mainly because of his talent level. So I decided to put him right there.
Yeah,
He,
that's fair. I mean, the 5.6 yards per carry, that is very respectable. Very respectable.
yeah,
Um,
and
yeah,
he averaged six the season before, so it's not like he wasn't consistent. It was about six his whole career,
yeah.
and yeah,
Um,
he finished his career with a little bit over 400 carries. So he met that threshold we talked about where he was getting more than 10 carries a game. Like it's easy to average 6 yards, like you said, when you're getting 8 carries a game. But he was consistently running 20, 25 times in that Bielema system. So that's why I
mhm.
decided to put him there. Is there any who would you look at there, or possibly you would put him over since you say it's a hot take?
Yeah, the reason I think it's a little bit hot is he was, in my opinion, the number two running back on a, somewhat it wasn't like a 1 and 2 combo like McFadden and Felix, right? It was Alex Collins and him. So for him to be the number two behind Alex Collins, who I like Alex Collins, and we might hear his name later, but that to me means like I don't know that you make it in the top five all time.
Yep.
I think some interesting names to look at, in the late 60s, early 70s, there was some pretty studly runners there in the late 60s.
Mm.
We had a 3-year starter, Bill Burnett.
Yeah.
He never topped 1,000 yards, but he got up to 900 in his second year as the starter. The thing about Burnett, he had pretty notable touchdown stats. I mean, one year he got 15, the next year he had 19, and then the following year he had 12. And this was back when they played, I think it was only 8 games a season, 8 or 9. So with less games, I mean, this guy was getting like 2 touchdowns a game.
Yeah.
So obviously, and with the yardage, obviously, with less games, having less yards in a season makes sense. So I feel like you could make a case for him being in the top five. Right after him, Dickie Morton, was one of he was actually our first ever running back to break 1,000 yards in a season.
Mhm.
Um, he did that twice in 72 and 73. Um, and on pretty good efficiency. I mean, in 71, he averaged 6.5 yards a carry, followed the next season 4.9, followed the next season 5.7. He didn't really get in the end zone much. Again, that's not the ultimate criteria. If someone has exceptional touchdown stats, that maybe moves them up. But if they have mediocre touchdown stats, that doesn't necessarily move them down.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say like you could make a case for Dickie Morton again, being a 3-year starter too. I give a little bit of weight to, guys who have multiple years of being a lead rusher, just in terms of overall greatness. I think doing something special. I'll say this, kind of on that same point, Rocket Sanders. Rocket Sanders had the potential to be on this list. I mean, his season in 22, I mean, 1,400 yards, averaging 6.5 a carry. I mean, freaking beast. 10 touchdowns, 220 carries. I mean, that's a workhorse. I mean, that's a guy that's getting the ball 20 times a game, like that is a heavy workload. And he even had like a game or two, where he was hampered by some injuries. I think sat out a game, sat out another couple of different halves. And to be able to put up those numbers, but it was one season,
That
right?
that
And
was my thing. It's just one season, and then there was such a drastic drop off. So I was like, I can't put him right there. And Jonathan Williams, I know it's a hot take, like you said, but I think even if he was the so-called number two, he was consistent in his production for multiple seasons.
he was. Um, I think you might have a little bit of bias because he was your era where you like
Well,
really got into
you
watching.
caught me red-handed.
That's
There,
No, I mean it's not a wild take. It's
but there is definitely other options and possibly better ones. I see what you're saying.
yeah, like I feel like if you're gonna go for yeah, again, I know that Jonathan had multiple seasons, but the like one or two really good seasons,
Yeah.
you can make a case for Raheem. If you go for a guy who has a little bit more longevity, maybe one of those like Bill Burnett or Dickie Mortensen guys. But then, yeah, I'd say in between, there's one name we might mention that came up in the 90s. But other than that, honestly, not a ton of great running. I mean, through the 90s, I'm sure there's a lot of homers that, are like, what? Wait, I missed the 90s. We were like awesome back then. But just looking back at the numbers, I mean, we were our leading rushers. I mean, this guy's averaging less than 4 yards a carry, got three touchdowns, one touchdown, and two touchdowns through an entire season on
Yeah.
600 yards, which is not great. Like we had almost a whole decade where we weren't breaking 700 yards in a season from any single runner. Um,
But the late 90s, we did have some good runners. I will say that. The late 90s, we did
yep.
have some going into that early 2000s era. We did have a couple.
Yeah, which is when we had the coaching change. It's when Houston Nutt came
Yeah.
around, started, rebuilding the program. We got in some good quarterbacks, obviously, which can help a running back get, more efficient numbers when you have at least a little bit of a threat of a passing game. So Sterner, Matt Jones, those guys. So yeah, we did have that, but between the 80s and early to mid 90s, I don't really see anyone making a super strong case. Maybe Ben Cowens as well from like the late 70s. He had 3 years in a row where he broke 1,000 yards. Um, consistently averaged over 5.5 yards a carry, had 27 touchdowns total over that span. So, again, that's 70s, 60s, and 70s. There's some strong runners, long drop off, and then why don't we get to your number four then, now that we're kind of caught up on talking about the
Okay. So
decade.
my number four is from that, just like we talked about, the late 90s, early 2000s era. Like you said, we didn't really have any studs like from the 70s through the early 90s. And then when the late 90s hit with that coaching change, we had Cedric Cobbs, and that's my number four. And he had over 3,000 yards in his career, 26 touchdowns. He played from 1999 to 2003. And let's now his yards per carry was not as it's about the same as Jonathan Williams, about 5.8. So around
Hmm.
that six range. But
Now, let
his
me let me ask you. So he ran in the same era as Fred Talley. Both
yes,
of them were split in the backfield. Tally outrushed him in terms of total season yardage in 2000, and '02. What was your reasoning of putting Cedric above Tally?
that's a good question. I just saw touchdowns and I did take that into consideration, but it could be Cedric Cobbs took him. He had 26 compared to Fred Talley's 11, so that doesn't like jump at me like 11 touchdowns. What's going on? But again, I was looking at yards per rush more like, and the criteria is minimum of 99 attempts. So like you said, we're not going off like 8 attempts and they average 20 yards a carry. But Fred Talley, yeah, it's pretty close. I think I think they're right there. And it's
Yeah.
tough. I didn't have an eye test. That was right before I was born. So maybe you could put a 4A, 4B with them both being in the backfield, Cedric Cobbs, Fred Talley, maybe do that portion and give them a tie, a split right there. Because that is a good point. That their stats, Cobbs is better in some stats, but then Talley's better. Talley didn't get as much of a workload. Something you got to consider as well.
Yeah. Yeah, over the course of their careers, workload wise, Cedric Cobbs had 589 attempts to Fred Talley's 498. So Cedric Cobbs had about 100 more attempts, which garnered him about 400 more yards, and 15 more touchdowns, over the same course of years. So I'd say, I think, yeah, I think you can make a case for either one of those. One of them's got to get it. I mean, I probably am with you that I lean slightly more towards Cedric Cobbs because, he doubled up on touchdowns. He did end up with more yards over the course of his career, on 100 more attempts. Um, so yeah, could go one or the other, but I don't think you can put both of them in the top five. So I'm I'm good with I'm
Uh,
good with Cedric Combs up there.
yeah, I think that ends the difficulty of like who to put in because these top three are like pretty unanimous. Like these need to be in here.
Hmm.
Just the order and not number one. Obviously, I think everyone listening knows or watching knows who's going to be number one. But I've debated about who to put at two and who to put at three all day, and I've decided to put Alex Collins at three. And it was tough, but Alex's best season was 2015, right after Jonathan Williams left. He had 1,577 yards on 271 rushes, 20 touchdowns, pretty solid stats, pretty good stats.
Yeah.
He's ninth in like all-time game rushing yards. He had 212 against Texas Tech, and that wasn't even his good year. So obviously he was carrying the workload like we talked about earlier. He was sharing the backfield, but he was number one. And then, yeah, I mean, he shows up again on the list. So that shows even when Jonathan Williams was there, Alex Collins was still getting 1,000. So if you're able to do that with another stud running back in the backfield with you, that's saying something. And it's not like we had a scrub at quarterback. Like I know we were run heavy offense. I've noted that, but Brandon Allen was a pretty good quarterback. We've already went over that. Everyone saw that past episode. Like it wasn't a
Hmm.
scrub out there. So Alex Collins fits the mold. I mean, he's second all time in rushing yards for a career, right behind
Yeah.
Darren McFadden, 3,703. And he had 36 career touchdowns. I mean, I don't know how you don't put him three.
Right.
I was like, I mean, even yards per carry, he's still right there, 5.8, that same range. So,
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I think Alex Collins, I think Alex Collins can make a case to be the number two, all
yeah,
time.
I think so too. It was tough to
Yeah.
look
I
at.
mean, he was a tough runner, He could run through guys, but still had speed. Um, which, yeah, I mean, he was just special. That's why he's been able to make a decent NFL career for himself, has played multiple years, gotten good, decent numbers, decent stats, had some good games, so like the proof is that, it wasn't just system.
Yeah,
Yeah, 3,700 yards over his career, 36 touchdowns. I mean, that's a workhorse, man. 665 attempts, running attempts. I mean, that takes such a toll on your body. Multiple years as our lead back.
yeah,
Um, he earned his stripes. So yeah, I'm a big fan um of having Alex Collins there, and in terms of as far as people go, not seasons, but in terms of people, he has the number two best season, and number two overall, like most, overall yards and touchdowns as well, total touchdowns. So yeah, I'm in on him.
And it's tragic with what happened to Alex passing away so young. Same thing with Ryan Mallett. It stinks. And I know we'll all remember him as a great Razorback. So rest in peace to Alex. We're gonna put him at 3. We both are.
Yeah, yeah, I would put him at 3. Um, I'm yeah, I'm still with you on Cobbs at 4. I think for me, I ended up probably going with Bill Burnett at uh at the number 5 spot.
Yeah,
Just 46 touchdowns. Um,
to be. Come on.
just beast. He's, uh right up there in terms of career running yards, multiple season running yards. So I'm probably with Bill on number 5, but then I'm with you, Collins. I could maybe make a case for Alex Collins number 2, but it's hard to deny who our number 2 is just because of the legend. The eye test here uh probably is what sways more than the stats do. So go ahead and tell us who number 2 is. No
Number
surprise.
yeah, number 2 is Felix Jones.
Yeah.
You guys out there. Yeah. I mean, Felix, we're talking about carries. He had 386 and he had 20 touchdowns and almost 3,000 yards, 292,956. Cedric Cobbs, who was on the list earlier at 4, is right above him with like 50 more yards and he had 203 more carries. That's talking about doing damage with a limited workload. And Felix Jones averaged a whopping 8.7 yards per carry on 133 rushes. So in a 12 game season, he's getting more than 10. He's getting about 15 a game. And he is he's going off. And then again, 1,168, 2006 on 154 rushes. 154 rushes, and he's doing that amount of damage when all the other guys on the list are getting 200 plus easily.
Hmm.
And he's doing that with 133. That's just insane to me.
Yeah. It- yeah. Felix was incredible. I mean, with those kind of stats and looking back, I mean that was my era. That's when I went to the university was oh 06, oh 07, oh 08, all the way through 11. And it really felt like every third time he touched the ball, he was breaking for a 25-yard run. Um, it was just crazy. And which, I mean, that's what the stats bear out, like you maybe get 2 yards, 2 yards, and then 25 yards. That's how you get an 8-yard average or 9, basically. And it's just crazy. I mean, he was so fast. He knew exactly where to go. He knew like his ability to juke, his ability to make guys miss, his ability to like get the edge. Like he was he was exceptional. He was so wild. And the fact that he was able to rack up all of that
Yeah.
against while also being a number 2 running back to Darren McFadden, the
And
fact
having
that
Peyton Hillis in the same backfield. So it's not, and
Peyton
he was
Hillis
missing out on carries in that way too.
missing out on carries there, but by having DMAC also in that backfield, teams were lining up 9 in the box against
Yeah.
us, 8 in the box, because it was like, yo, you have DMAC and Felix Jones. Like, all that we're going to do is defend your run. And to still put up those numbers when teams know all you're going to do is run, run, run is absolutely insane. Like, imagine if he had a better quarterback than Casey Dick or a freshman Mitch Mustaine. If he had anyone better than that at quarterback that could have spread the field a little bit more, kept things spaced, like, and if he had the backfield to himself, like his numbers could have been astronomical if
Oh, he's number 1 everywhere if he doesn't have to share a backfield with Darren McFadden. Because
yeah.
like you said, the box was loaded and we sub in Felix and it's like, okay, Felix Jones is in the game. He's gonna be a decoy and block. Like, no, everybody knew he's gonna get the ball.
Yeah.
So it's like you're preparing for him, and yet he's still just gonna run past you. That's the crazy part, is that they
It's
knew he
so
was gonna get
weird.
the ball and they still couldn't stop him.
They were so good that like a lot of people still give Malzahn credit for inventing the Wildcat formation of we're going to snap it directly to a running back and give them the option to hand it to the other running back if they want. Like that's how good the duo was that like yeah, there may have been other teams in the past that ran it, but it never got any sort of acclaim. And then with Arkansas, it was like everyone suddenly became aware of like, oh, the Wildcat formation, like two running backs with no quarterback in the backfield. That's actually an option. Oh yeah, you can do that when you have two of these guys back
Yeah,
here. It was a
he's
video game.
out of this world. That's yeah, literally a video game. You can't relate it to anything.
Yeah, it's craziness.
And I'm trying to think right now. Like, I think Ohio State could pull that off this year. Like Judkins and the other guy they have in the backfield. I think that's like the only time you've ever seen this kind of duo that could possibly happen again. Like that was how unique Felix Jones and DMAC were. So, I mean, you've never seen it again. And the Wildcat, like you just said, you don't see that anymore. It was we recreated it, and then the Dolphins used it to somehow have a miracle season like a couple years later, and then it's been spread here and there, but we definitely perfected it. I will.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, if two was obvious, then number one is like putting it on the wall and saying, "Here, come look at," because it's Darren McFadden. I mean, everybody knows that. There's no doubt in anybody's mind who number one is.
Yeah. His stats, having only been a runner for 3 years, he had a chance to run in a whole
Yeah,
additional year.
I know.
Yeah, he ran in '05, '06, and '07. His stats are just insane. I mean, 45, almost 4,600 rushing yards
Yeah.
over his career with 41 touchdowns on 780 attempts. I mean, like, it's a freaking beast. He owns the number one and number two records for rushing yards per season. He got 1,800 in '07, 1,600 in '06. The only two times in Arkansas history that 1,600 number has been broken, and he did it twice. Um, yeah, he was just insane.
Well, everybody knows Jeremy McFadden. I mean, he's arguably the biggest Heisman Trophy snub there is. Twice. I mean,
Yeah,
twice. And
it's just because our team.
you got to watch it on campus. I can't imagine that feeling of being on campus the same time when all this was going on. I can't imagine that experience.
It was it was a pretty crazy couple years. I mean, the Heisman snub sucked. Felt super unfair. Felt like it was just politics, you know. Um, and yeah, um, everything that went down in '06 as well with Malzahn and Mustaine and the Springdale Five and that whole thing, and then Casey Dick, and Mustaine being the quarterback, and then who's his the quarterback, and does Houston Nutt actually trust Malzahn to run the offense and all that? It was such a bummer because it created so much noise in what would have otherwise been, I mean, it still is, one of our best, 4 seasons of all time, in terms of finish and record
Oh
and
yeah.
what we all that. But yeah, we rode the whole thing on the back of Darren McFadden. I mean, we just did not stop riding him all 3 years.
Yeah.
Especially '06, '07. I mean, it was just like put everything on his back and just go.
And why wouldn't you? I mean, anybody with any sort of brain would do the same thing if you have that kind of talent in the backfield. Give him the
Yeah,
ball and find a way just to get him the ball in space anywhere. We thought Felix Jones was fast. Darren McFadden was faster, and that's the crazy thing.
yeah,
If Darren McFadden got a seam or a lane, no one was catching him. That no one.
yeah. It was sweet. I mean, check this out. In '07, which was the year we lost Malzahn, so we lost Malzahn at the end of '06. After one season, Mustang moved on. Casey Dick was, the I think got the starting position again, and it was just like, what is this team? Houston Nutt was on the fence. So we didn't have anything going for us except for McFadden and Jones. And so McFadden ran the ball 325 times that year. That's like almost 30 carries a game.
Yeah, that practically yeah, it has to be. It is 30 carries a game with two other people in the backfield.
It's stupid. I mean, yeah, 325. Just craziness. Um, yeah. Yep. So he's number one. Everyone loves D-Mac, the most beloved. Is he the most beloved? Not football, but in football, I think it's no question that he's the most beloved football athlete to ever come through Arkansas.
Oh yeah.
Is he the most beloved? I mean, I feel like it probably has to be him, right?
I would think so. I think he's got to be.
Yeah. Like who would be more beloved? I mean, there like people really were impressed by Ryan Mallett, but he wasn't necessarily beloved. Obviously, people are stoked on what Mallett did. Also rest in peace.
Mhm.
Um, in basketball, it was like Joe
Corliss.
Johnson, Corliss Williamson.
Gotta be Corliss in basketball.
Yeah, it's got to be Corliss in basketball, but I still think it the love and the legend of Corliss, even though he won a national championship, still pales, I think, in comparison to just like the lore of Darren McFadden.
And I feel you're a little biased since you were on campus during his time, so I feel like
Probably what definitely.
no, I don't blame
Uh,
you at all.
I think too what was, and this is rare for Arkansas, right, to get that national media attention. So for DMAC to be up there in the Heisman conversation, unquestionably in the Heisman conversation, he wasn't a dark horse. It was like, wait, this guy has to be, like in the Heisman running. Got to go to New York. Nationally, there was the other day, it was a sports account that I follow that's not an Arkansas account. It was like ESPN or like EA Sports or something like that said best college running backs of all time, and it had DMAC at the top of that list, and it was DMAC and Reggie Bush. It was
Yeah,
like everyone was kind of debating, is it DMAC or is it Reggie Bush? And obviously, to be in the conversation with Reggie Bush, who
yeah.
did win the Heisman and a national championship and broke all kinds of records at USC, to have people be like, it could be DMAC. Well, it could be Reggie Bush.
Yeah.
Maybe Reggie Bush gets the edge just because of his receiving ability added on top. But it's like no other Arkansas player has that like individual national recognition like DMAC did and still does. More almost 2 decades later, he's still on people's lips talking about the best running back of all time in college, and the fact that he didn't get the Heisman is so still infuriating.
Yeah, it's upsetting. It's one of the biggest tragedies of our history, especially.
Yeah.
But that wraps up today's episode. Any final thoughts or feelings heading in 2 weeks from season? Are you drinking that so-called Kool-Aid as we head into the season?
No, I'm keeping my expectations low. Um, I'm ready to see. I'm ready to see what this team has to offer. Um, are our skill guys going to be as exceptional as they need to be? And if they are, can our O-line give them the time and the opportunity to show their skills and show that what they can be? Don't know. Will our defense keep other teams in check well enough to give our offense a chance? Even if our offense under Bob Petrino is awesome, can our defense keep other teams in check? I don't know. So keeping expectations low until like week 3 or 4, and then we'll see.
Exactly. But week two will be a good game. Oklahoma State, I can't wait. I'm just ready
Yep.
for fun to be here, honestly.
Yep. Same.
All right. Thank you guys for listening. We appreciate all the support and looking forward to future episodes. Thank you.